You don't usually expect murder to wear silk gloves. But in 1858 Pennsylvania, at a place called Wildwood Estate, violence didn't arrive screaming. It arrived quietly, politely, and stayed long enough to destroy everything. This wasn't the kind of horror that broke windows or kicked down doors. It poured tea, it spoke softly, it smiled, and by the time anyone understood what was happening inside Wildwood Estate, there was no one left to stop it. Now, let's go back. Wildwood Estate stood just outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where the land rolled gently and the air smelled of damp earth and old leaves. Tall oak trees surrounded the property like silent guards, their branches stretching wide, casting long shadows that crept farther across the lawn every evening as the sun slipped lower. White fences lined the estate, perfectly painted, perfectly straight, not a chip, not a crack. At sunset, they almost glowed, catching the last light of the day as if the house itself wanted to be admired. And it was. Carriages passed the estate road every day. Travelers slowed without realizing it. People pointed, some smiled, some whispered. That's where the lucky people live. Wildwood looked like the kind of place bad things avoided, and for a while, it was. The house had been built to impress. Wide windows, tall ceilings, a wraparound porch that caught every breeze. Inside, polished wood floors reflected candlelight like still water. The walls held portraits of serious men and elegant women, faces frozen in oil paint, eyes following you just enough to make you uncomfortable if you stared too long. But no one ever stared too long because nothing seemed wrong. The estate belonged to Edgar Whitcomb, a respected landowner in his early 40s. He came from money, but not loudly. He wore clean coats, spoke in measured sentences, and never raised his voice unless absolutely necessary. Edgar was not cruel. He just wasn't warm. He was the kind of man who believed control was kindness. That structure solved most problems. That emotions, if left unattended, would eventually settle on their own, like dust. When Edgar walked through the house, servants straightened their backs, not out of fear, out of habit. He nodded when spoken to. He listened. He remembered names, but he never lingered. His wife, Margaret, filled the silence he left behind. Margaret Whitcomb was everything Edgar was not, at least on the surface. She hosted dinners that lasted too long. She laughed easily, sometimes at jokes that weren't funny. She touched people's arms when she spoke, leaned in close, asked questions she didn't wait to hear the answers to. She was admired, and she was exhausting. There was something about Margaret's smile that stayed just a moment too long, like she was holding it in place. Like if she let go, something underneath might slip out. Still, no one questioned it, because women smiled, because hosts were cheerful, because appearances mattered. They had 3 children. Henry, 16, was already tall enough to look Edgar in the eye. He carried himself like someone older, heavier, as if responsibility had settled on his shoulders before he had time to refuse it. Henry noticed details, changes in tone, doors left open that shouldn't be. He noticed his mother's moods, and he didn't talk about them. Lillian, 12, was quieter, curious, the kind of child who listened from staircases and remembered things adults assumed she'd forgotten. She asked questions, but only when she felt safe doing so, which was becoming less often. Thomas, 7, still believed the house loved him back. He ran through the halls. He played with wooden horses on the floor. He trusted bedtime stories and closed doors, and the idea that parents always knew best. From the outside, the Whitcombs were a picture. From the inside, something had begun to shift. It started small. Margaret complained of noises at night, soft footsteps moving down the hallway, doors opening, then closing again. The sound of something being dragged slowly across the floor. Edgar dismissed it. Old houses made sounds. Wood expanded, beams settled. The mind filled in gaps when it was tired. Margaret accepted his explanation. At least, she pretended to. But the noises didn't stop. Sometimes Margaret claimed she heard whispers, not words, just breath, movement, presence. Edgar grew irritated, not frightened, irritated. Fear required acknowledgement. Irritation required control. Servants noticed things too. A door to the pantry left open when no one had been inside. Candles extinguished without drafts. Footsteps in rooms that should have been empty. One cook quit after a single week. She said she felt watched while preparing meals, like someone was standing just behind her, close enough that she could feel breath. But when she turned around, no one was there. Another servant claimed she heard whispering from inside the walls late at night. Edgar paid them extra, not to investigate, not to fix anything, just to stay quiet. And they did, because money solved problems, until it didn't. The house began to feel crowded, not with people, but with silence, heavy silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes small sounds feel louder than they should. Margaret walked the halls late at night, barefoot, sometimes holding a lantern, sometimes without one. Henry noticed. He began sleeping with his door locked. Lillian started hiding things, small items, toys, ribbons, under her mattress, as if she were preparing to leave without knowing why. Thomas complained of bad dreams. Margaret stopped smiling as often during the day and smiled more at night. There were moments, small ones, that no one wrote down, no one spoke about. Margaret standing too long at the children's bedroom doors. Margaret washing her hands repeatedly, even when they weren't dirty. Margaret staring out the windows toward the tree line, her expression unreadable. Edgar noticed changes. He just believed they would pass. Because acknowledging them meant admitting he was wrong. Because understanding them meant action. And action meant failure. So life continued. Meals were served. Candles were lit. Doors were locked. Until one night, a door stayed locked longer than it should have. Because the real horror at Wildwood Estate didn't announce itself. It didn't scream. It didn't run. It waited, patient, quiet, like it had all the time in the world. And when it finally arrived, it arrived behind a locked door. Cold arrived early that year, not the kind that bites all at once, but the kind that slips in quietly, through cracks in windows, through floorboards, into bones. The kind that makes a house feel older than it really is. That evening, Wildwood Estate glowed softly against the darkening sky. Lamps lit the windows. Smoke drifted from the chimneys. From the outside, it looked alive, warm, ordinary. Inside, the Whitcomb family gathered for dinner, just as they always did. Soup steamed gently in porcelain bowls. Bread was broken by hand. Candles flickered, their flames bending slightly every time the house sighed or settled. Edgar Whitcomb spoke about land disputes, railroads, a meeting he planned to attend the following week. His voice was calm, steady, practiced. Margaret barely ate. She lifted her spoon once, twice, then set it back down, untouched. Her eyes drifted, not to Edgar, not to the children, but past them. toward the hallway that disappeared into darkness beyond the dining room. Henry noticed. He always noticed. 16 years old, already too observant for his own good. He watched the way his mother's fingers tightened around her napkin, the way she paused, listening every few seconds, as if waiting for something to answer her. Not fear, expectation. Lillian felt it too, though she couldn't name it. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Thomas swung his legs beneath the table, humming softly, blissfully unaware. At one point, Margaret smiled. Not at anyone in particular, just smiled. And then she stood. "I'm tired," she said gently. "I think I'll retire early." Edgar nodded, distracted. The children said goodnight. Margaret kissed each of them on the head, lingering just a second longer with Thomas. Henry felt a chill crawl up his spine. He would remember that moment for the rest of his life. The house settled into its nighttime routine. Lamps dimmed. Servants moved quietly through the halls, careful not to disturb the family. Around midnight, the estate grew still, too still. Then it happened. A single sound, sharp, sudden. Not loud enough to wake the entire house, but distinct enough that those already awake froze where they stood. Some described it as wood cracking under pressure. Others said it sounded like a heavy object striking something solid. One servant later whispered it sounded like a bone snapping. And then, nothing. No scream, no shout for help. No hurried footsteps racing down the halls. Just silence. A silence so complete it felt intentional, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The night passed. Morning arrived the way it always does, unaware, indifferent. Sunlight spilled across the lawn. Birds called from the trees. Smoke no longer rose from the chimneys. Inside Wildwood Estate, something was terribly wrong. The housekeeper noticed it first. Breakfast should have been requested by now. The master was always punctual. Routine mattered to Edgar Whitcomb. She knocked on the master bedroom door. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Still nothing. A faint unease crept in. She tried the handle. Locked. That was unusual. The master never locked the door. She called for help. A servant fetched a constable who happened to be nearby. Together, they forced the door open. Edgar Whitcomb lay on the floor beside the bed. His throat had been cut cleanly, precise, controlled. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood spattered on the walls. Whoever did this hadn't rushed. Margaret lay in the bed, perfectly still. Her eyes were open, staring upward. Her hands were folded neatly over her chest, as though someone had taken great care arranging them. She looked peaceful, too peaceful. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. And then someone asked the question no one wanted to ask. Where are the children? Panic spread through the house like fire. Servants searched every room, closets, hallways, the nursery, the schoolroom. Henry, Lillian, Thomas, gone. Outside, neighbors gathered as word spread. Constables arrived on horseback, their animals restless, stamping the frozen ground as if sensing danger. There was no blood trail leading away from the house. No broken window, no forced entry, nothing stolen, nothing disturbed. It was as if the killer hadn't broken in at all, as if they'd been invited, or worse, as if they'd never left. The search widened. Fields, barns, outbuildings, the nearby woods. Hours passed. Then someone shouted, and the world shifted. Half a mile behind the estate, beyond a thicket most people avoided, the search party slowed. The air smelled wrong, heavy, sweet, rotting. Men exchanged glances but kept moving. Henry was found first, propped against a tree, eyes open, hands bound. No visible wounds at first glance, until closer inspection revealed bruises along his wrists. Defensive marks. He had fought. He had known who was hurting him. Lillian lay nearby, curled on her side, as if sleeping, her face calm, too calm. Thomas was never found whole. Even men hardened by disease, death, and war turned away, some wretched. One constable later resigned and refused to ever enter those woods again. An explanation was offered quickly, too quickly. An intruder, a drifter, someone passing through. Anything to avoid the truth forming in the back of everyone's mind, because the details refused to cooperate. Henry's injuries suggested recognition, not surprise. Lillian's shoes were missing, later discovered placed neatly at the edge of the forest. Thomas's favorite toy horse was found back at the house, clean, untouched. And then there was Margaret, her hands. No blood beneath the nails, just dirt, fresh soil, forest soil. Margaret hadn't been placed in bed. She had been cleaned. And suddenly the question no one wanted to ask became unavoidable. What if the horror at Wildwood Estate hadn't come from outside at all? What if it had been sitting at the dinner table the entire time? And if that was true, then the real nightmare was only just beginning. Half a mile behind Wildwood Estate, the land changed. The manicured grass gave way to tangled undergrowth. The trees grew closer together. The light thinned out, even though it was still early in the day. Locals avoided this stretch of woods. No one ever agreed on why. Some said animals wouldn't go near it. Others said sound behaved strangely there. Voices swallowed too quickly, footsteps echoing where they shouldn't. The search party slowed the moment they crossed the tree line. Not because they were tired, because the air felt wrong. It smelled wrong, not like rot exactly, not like blood, something worse, something quietly final. The men exchanged glances but didn't speak. No one wanted to be the first to say what they were all thinking, that they were already too late. Henry Whitcomb was found first. He sat propped against the base of an oak tree, his back straight, his head tilted slightly to one side, almost as if he were listening. His eyes were open, not wide with panic, not frozen in shock, just open. His hands were bound neatly in front of him with cord taken from the estate's storage shed, a knot tied carefully, intentionally. There were no obvious wounds, no blood soaking his clothes, no sign of chaos around him. But his knuckles were raw, skin torn, nails cracked. Henry had fought, and whoever he fought, he recognized. The men standing over his body didn't say a word. One removed his hat, another crossed himself. A third turned away, already swallowing bile. A few yards away they found Lillian. She lay curled on her side in a bed of leaves, knees drawn up, one hand tucked beneath her cheek like she'd fallen asleep during a long carriage ride. Her face was peaceful, too peaceful. No marks on her neck, no visible injuries, just stillness, the kind that doesn't belong to children. And then there was Thomas. Thomas wasn't found the same way. Pieces of him were. What remained was scattered deeper into the trees, far enough apart that it took time for the searchers to understand what they were seeing. Even in 1858, an era hardened by illness, infant death, and war, men broke. One vomited against a tree and didn't stop shaking for hours. Another sat down and refused to stand again. A constable who'd survived battlefield carnage turned his horse around and rode away, later resigning his post entirely. He never entered those woods again. Silence followed the discovery, the kind that presses in on your ears. And then, almost immediately, the explanations began, too quickly. An unknown intruder, they said, a drifter passing through the area, a criminal looking for money, anything but the truth, because the details refused to cooperate. Henry's defensive wounds told a story no stranger could explain. You don't fight like that against someone you've never met. Lillian's shoes were missing, later found placed neatly at the edge of the forest, side by side, toes pointing toward the trees. Thomas's favorite toy horse, the one he refused to sleep without, was discovered back at the estate, sitting on his bed, clean, not a speck of dirt on it, as if it had never left the house. And then there was Margaret, back at Wildwood Estate. As constables examined the master bedroom more closely, they noticed something small, something easy to miss. Margaret Whitcomb's hands. There was no blood beneath her fingernails. Instead, there was dirt, packed beneath each nail. Dark, damp, fresh forest soil. Margaret hadn't been placed in bed. She hadn't collapsed there. She had been washed, scrubbed clean, and then arranged. That realization spread through the investigation like a cold draft, through a cracked window. If Margaret had been in the woods, if she'd returned on her own, if she'd locked the door behind her, then the danger at Wildwood Estate hadn't crept in from the outside. It had walked out the front door and calmly walked back in. And for the first time since the bodies were discovered, the men involved in the case stopped asking who had done this and started asking something far more unsettling. How long had it been happening? Before anyone noticed, the truth didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It leaked out slowly, through pauses, glances, half-finished sentences, through the things people only say when they realize silence is no longer protecting them. As the days passed and the pressure mounted, the servants began to speak, not loudly, not confidently, but they spoke. One by one, they admitted what they had always known, but never dared to say out loud, that Margaret Whitcomb did not sleep like other people. Several servants recalled seeing her awake long after the house had gone still, sitting upright in bed, staring at nothing, lips moving as if in conversation with someone who wasn't there. Others remembered the sound of her footsteps late at night, slow and deliberate, pacing the halls while everyone else pretended not to hear. One maid confessed that Margaret often walked the grounds after dark, not wandering, not aimless, purposeful. She carried a lantern, its glow bobbing between the trees like a floating eye. She never called out, never acknowledged anyone who saw her. She simply moved toward the woods night after night, as if answering something that only she could hear. Another servant remembered seeing her kneeling in the garden at dawn, hands buried deep in the soil, whispering prayers that didn't sound like prayers at all. Henry had noticed it too. Months before the murders, he confided something to his tutor, something that was dismissed as childish imagination at the time. He said his mother was different after dark, not angry, not cruel, just empty. As if the woman who tucked him into bed wasn't the same person who stood silently at his door hours later, watching him sleep. When investigators searched Margaret's private sitting room, they found what Edgar had never allowed himself to look for: religious writings, not scripture meant for comfort, but texts marked with frantic notes in the margins, passages underlined again and again. Words like purification, corruption, sacrifice circled until the ink tore through the page. There were references to cleansing sins not through prayer, but through blood, to saving souls by destroying what had already been tainted. And then, buried beneath those pages, the thing no one wanted to confront. Margaret Whitcomb had broken years earlier. It started after a stillbirth, one that was never spoken of again. In 1858, there was no language for grief like that, no therapy, no understanding, just a diagnosis whispered behind closed doors. Melancholia, a word used to dismiss what frightened people. She was expected to recover quietly, to return to her duties, to smile again, to pretend that something inside her hadn't shattered completely. And, for a time, she did. But grief doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It changes shape. Margaret became convinced that something was wrong with her children, not sick, not misbehaving, wrong. She believed they were changing in ways she couldn't explain, that something impure had taken hold of them, that the innocence she was supposed to protect had already been corrupted. In her mind, this wasn't madness. It was responsibility. She wasn't harming them. She was saving them. Edgar began to notice the shift too. Her fixation, her sleeplessness, the way her eyes lingered on the children for too long. He spoke to doctors, quietly, carefully. He planned to send her away to an institution, somewhere safe, somewhere far from Wildwood. Margaret found out. And that was the moment everything stopped being theoretical. That night, Edgar died first. There was no argument, no shouting, no struggle, just surprise. The kind that freezes you long enough for the blade to do its work. The children were easier. They trusted her. She told them they were going on a walk, a game, a story she wanted to share. Henry realized the truth when it was already too late. He fought. That's why his hands were bound. That's why there were marks on his arms. That's why his eyes were open when they found him. Lillian never ran. Thomas never understood. When it was over, Margaret did something that still unsettles anyone who studies the case. She went home. She washed. She scrubbed every trace of blood from her skin, carefully cleaning beneath her fingernails, but not enough to remove the dirt. The forest had marked her. It clung to her, even after the water ran clear. She dressed herself. She locked the bedroom door, and she lay down beside her husband's body, folding her hands over her chest, as if she were already preparing for burial. She didn't flee. She didn't hide. She waited, as if she believed, truly believed, that once everything was done, the world would understand. But the final chapter never came. Margaret Whitcomb never confessed. Before any formal questioning could begin, she fell ill in her cell. The records are vague. Fever, weakness, decline. Days later, she was dead. No autopsy, no investigation, no answers. Officially, the case remained unresolved. An unknown intruder, a tragedy without a culprit. A family destroyed by forces no one could name. And maybe that's the most disturbing part, because the truth wasn't buried to protect the guilty. It was buried to protect everyone else. Because if Margaret Whitcomb was the monster, then she wasn't born that way. She was created. And that means Wildwood wasn't an isolated horror. It was a warning, a reminder of what happens when pain is ignored, when suffering is hidden behind polite smiles, when silence is mistaken for peace. The murders at Wildwood Estate were never officially solved, but the house knew, the woods knew, and somewhere beneath the soil, the truth is still waiting, quiet, patient, and perfectly willing to stay hidden until someone listens too closely to the silence Wildwood Estate didn't die the night the Whitcombs did. Not really. It lingered. For a while after the murders, the house remained exactly as it was. Furniture untouched, curtains still hanging, plates still stacked in the kitchen cupboard, like someone might return any minute and set the table again. But no one ever did. Locals avoided the road that passed near the estate. Farmers took longer routes. Carriages slowed without meaning to, wheels creaking softer as they passed, as if sound itself might wake something. People said the house felt aware, not haunted in the dramatic sense. No screaming ghosts, no shadows lunging from corners, just watched. Windows reflected light strangely at night, even with no lamps burning inside. Some swore they saw movement behind the glass, slow, deliberate shapes that vanished the moment you focused on them. The servants never returned to collect their belongings. They left clothes behind, shoes, letters from home. Whatever fear pushed them away from Wildwood was stronger than hunger, stronger than money, stronger than curiosity. And that fear spread. Children were warned not to play near the estate. Parents told them stories, not the real ones, but close enough. Tales about wolves in the woods, about sick animals, about unsafe ground. Because how do you explain to a child that a place can feel wrong, that a house can remember? Teenagers, of course, tested the boundaries. They dared each other to run up to the gates and touch the iron, then sprint away laughing. Every generation had at least one group brave or foolish enough to try. Most never made it past the fence. They said the air changed the closer you got. Heavier, thicker, like breathing through damp cloth. Sounds felt muted, like the world was holding its breath. Some claimed they heard footsteps behind them while running back down the road, not chasing, following, slowly. The woods behind Wildwood became worse. That stretch of forest where the children had been found refused to return to normal. Trees there grew uneven, twisted in ways that didn't match the rest of the land. Moss clung thicker. Sunlight struggled to break through the canopy, even on clear days. Hunters avoided it, not because of superstition, because animals wouldn't go near it. Deer tracks stopped at the tree line and turned away. Birds flew over the area without landing. Dogs whined and pulled at their leashes, refusing to step between the trunks. And then there were the lantern lights. The first report came less than a year after the murders. A farmer returning home late claimed he saw a single lantern moving slowly through the woods, weaving between trees where no path existed. He assumed it was a lost traveler and called out. The light stopped, hovered, then continued on, deeper into the forest, away from him. No footsteps, no reply, just the soft sway of yellow light vanishing into darkness. Others saw it too, enough that people stopped dismissing it as imagination. Always a single lantern, always low to the ground, always silent. Some swore they heard voices with it, children's voices, soft, laughing, just before dawn, when the world is quiet enough that your own thoughts feel too loud. And then there were the shoes. That detail never sat right with anyone. Small shoes, child-sized, found at the edge of the forest, not scattered, not dirty, placed side by side, toes facing outward, as if waiting for someone to put them on. No footprints leading to them, no footprints leading away. Each time, the shoes vanished by the next day. Taken by animals, people said. But no one ever saw animals near them. The house itself began to decay, slowly and unevenly. The roof sagged, walls cracked, windows shattered from storms. but the master bedroom remained strangely intact longer than the rest. Locals noticed it before it was ever mentioned in print. That room held, as if something didn't want it to fall apart. Eventually, the Whitcomb name faded from conversation. New families moved into the area. Roads were improved. Time did what it always does, covered old horror with fresh noise. But Wildwood refused to be forgotten. Every few years, someone would try to buy the land. Developers, private owners, men convinced they were smarter than old stories. None stayed. One group attempted renovations in the late 1800s. They cleared brush, measured the foundation, brought in workers. By the third day, half the crew quit. They complained of headaches, of nausea, of dreams they couldn't explain. One man claimed he heard a woman humming inside the ruins late at night when everyone else had gone. A lullaby, slow, gentle. He refused to return. The project was abandoned without explanation. Decades later, the house was finally torn down, not because anyone wanted to, but because no one wanted responsibility if someone got hurt exploring it. Brick by brick, beam by beam. And yet, even when the last wall fell, people said the ground felt unsettled, as if something had been buried improperly. The land was reused, trees cut, new paths carved. Life moved on, but hikers still talk. They say the woods near where Wildwood once stood feel colder, even in summer. That sound doesn't travel the same way. That their thoughts get heavier there, darker, uninvited. Some feel watched, others feel judged. And the strangest part, no one reports seeing a woman, no figure in white, no screaming specter, just absence. A sense that something gentle once lived there and broke quietly. Because Wildwood was never about a monster hiding in shadows. There was no mask, no snarl, no dramatic reveal. The horror lived in normalcy, in smiles held too long, in pain ignored because it made others uncomfortable, in a house where silence was mistaken for peace. Margaret Whitcomb didn't look like a villain. She hosted dinners. She poured tea. She tucked children into bed. And history prefers its monsters obvious. Because obvious monsters are easy to fear, Wildwood reminds us of the ones who aren't. The ones who break slowly, quietly, politely. The ones who wait until no one is listening anymore. So, if you ever find yourself walking through old woods and the air feels heavier than it should, and sound seems to pull away from you instead of toward you, listen carefully, because sometimes the most dangerous things don't chase you. They wait for you to stop talking, and once you do, they never let you leave the same way you came. And that silence you feel right now, that's Wildwood, still listening.